All right. Thank you, everyone. I think we are ready to open this up to the workshop. And Marina is going to moderate the workshop for us. Um, so, Marina and Vinroy can unmute and take it away.
Thank you so much, Sue, and thank you all for being part of our meeting as we move forward into 2022 to, again, make more music and make more connections between each other. Today's workshop is the first step in that effort. We are very, very, very excited because I think this is a topic today that many of us have not had as much experience with as we would like. Exploring classical choral music by Black composers. There is a tremendous, wonderful movement right now to give due to composers who haven't, up to this point in time, been either marginalized or ignored. There is some amazing music out there, and I can think of no better person to guide us through this than Vinroy Brown. Vinroy is the artistic director and conductor of the Capital Singers of Trenton and also of the Westminster Jubilee Singers, and also serves right now as the director of the Eastern Region of the National Association of Negro Musicians. And so with that pedigree, I think he will be able to give us some great insights. We also have a panel who we hope will add into the conversations because they've had some experience both with Vinroy and with some of this literature. We are very happy to welcome Ryan Brandau, the artistic director of the Monmouth Civic Chorus and of both, and also of Princeton Pro Musica. So hi, Ryan. Very happy you're here. We are delighted also to have with us Helen Vassallo Kernizan, who is the director of the Rise Up Youth Chorus, and also plays an important role in the educational scene here in New Jersey. She is the Central New Jersey Music Education Association K-8 Chorus and General Music Chair, and as a result of that, I'm sure, has to deal with repertory issues. And so again, Helen, welcome, and thank you for being part of today's event. Happy you're here. And then we also are delighted to have with us Matthew Zabiegala, the music director of the New Jersey Chamber Singers, and also serves as the director of music for the Presbyterian Church of Chatham. So Matt, welcome today as well. I'm going to turn the event now over to our presenter, Vinroy Brown, and take it away, please, Vinroy.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It is great to see each of you. I hope you all are well and safe. I hope that you all are navigating this crazy time that we are in for music making and wrestling with what that means for each of you and the organizations that you serve. I am so thrilled to be connected to the Choral Consortium. It offers a great deal of just support for our choruses throughout the state. My first introduction was as the newly appointed artistic director of the Capital Singers of Trenton almost 5 years ago. Marina was the president, and I was invited and thankfully invited to share some podium time with a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Christopher Thomas, as we went through the Messiah. And I've been encouraged by my chorus's membership and their participation in the Choral Consortium over the years. That's one fee we make sure every year that we pay because of opportunities like this. And I would never anticipate being the one presenting to the consortium, but here we are. And I'm grateful to do that today. And I'm grateful for our colleagues who are joining us today, two of which I have pretty strong connections to. Helen and I are both graduates of Westminster Choir College, and Ryan Brandau was my teacher at Westminster Choir College. And Matt, it's a pleasure. Facebook makes you think you know everyone anyway, but it's always great to make connections in real time. I certainly hope for all of our sake that this is the last annual meeting we do on Zoom by force. and that very soon we are together in person. So for today, I'm going to walk you through the classical music of Black composers. I have a presentation of about 20 to 30 minutes. I want to get that out of the way as quickly as possible so that we can all have a conversation about ways to program this repertoire, and that I can hear from you, and that our colleagues who are on the panel can hear from you about your challenges and your triumphs with this repertoire. I want to affirm the work that you are doing and let you know that this is safe space to ask questions, and to be inquisitive, and to dig for the answers you and your organizations need. So this is a safe place, free of judgment. No question is too big or too small. And I want you to feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. I will keep my eyes on the chat, and I will try to answer questions in real time as they come. Helen, Matt, and Ryan, please don't hesitate to chime in. I'm not that particular. Y'all know me by now. So if something comes to you and you want to say something or you want to respond, please feel free to chime in. Until then, we're going to start the presentation. Jeremy, shout out for all the IT. We all need good IT support. So thank you. All right. So again, my name is Vinroy. He, him pronouns. I come to you as a member of the consortium through the Capital Singers of Trenton, but do serve several other organizations that you'll hear about maybe or maybe not throughout the session. I'd like to keep this as little about me and as much about the music as possible. So I figured the best way to do this would be to kind of break down classical music in the context that we know it, and then talk about Black classical music, right? So classical music usually refers to what we would consider formal music tradition of the Western world, considered, really to have root in Western folk music or popular music traditions. And all that is true for Black classical music. But if we're going to frame our lens for Black classical music and add some specificity, we're speaking about spirituals, gospel, jazz, and some other genres of music in some other forms that we would kind of navigate in our traditional lens. And I'm going to parenthetically pause here very quickly to talk about the difference between spirituals and gospel. The two have similarities in that they come from a particular experience, but the two are not one and the same. The way I like to teach people about the difference is really the time period and the intent of the music. Spirituals, 19th century. Folk songs of a sacred nature of African slaves that speak about their need for personal freedom. Gospel music is a century later, 20th century, still sacred, but created for the purpose of economic freedom. And I say that because many of the gospel greats of the 20th century, those who we would consider contemporary gospel composers, or more traditional gospel composers even, really had backgrounds in blues and jazz and played for the church out of necessity, because they needed the income. We think about, Thomas Dorsey, for example. Many people know the tune Precious Lord. Thomas Dorsey was a jazz musician and a blues musician who would play in the clubs Monday through Saturday, get up on Sunday, play in church, and the same melodies that he played the other 6 days of the week would trickle into church. And that's how you got some of the music that really has shaped gospel music of the last 40, 50 years. So spirituals speak to the entire community, and gospel speaks to one person and their personal relationship to God. So that's how I kind of like to differentiate the difference between spirituals and gospel, and just figured it was a good parenthetical pause to insert for our presentation. So, pioneering composers of Black classical music, there are several of them. I won't be able to cover all of them just because of our time, but I did want to highlight specific composers, many of which I'm sure you have heard of for many different reasons. And these composers really set the stage for what would become this art form and really bring us and weave us through contemporary Black classical choral music. The first I want to mention is Harry Thacker Burleigh, out of Erie, Pennsylvania. He is one generation removed from slavery. His grandfather paid $55 for Freedom Papers for his papers, his grandmother's papers, and his great-grandmother's papers. He studied at the National Conservatory of Music, where he met a woman by the name of Mrs. McDowell, and he was connected as a result to Dvorak. Dvorak and Burleigh had a very interesting relationship. Dvorak felt as if the way to know a culture and the way to really honor the culture is to go back to the folk music of that culture. And he very early on realized that the folk music of America was the slave song, seeing that the tradition that was brought here was imported here from Europe, and the slave song was created here on American soil. So Burleigh and Dvorak developed a relationship, and Dvorak even quoted a spiritual tune in his New World Symphony. And that relationship really began to create a conversation about the importance of Black music during that time. Burleigh's works included spiritual arrangements for voice, for ensemble, art songs of Walt Whitman's texts. He wrote instrumental music. His catalog is somewhere between 200 and 300 songs. He's a founding member of ASCAP, alongside R. Nathaniel Dett, another pioneering composer. And he was on the board of directors of ASCAP in the 1940s. So Burleigh's definitely a name that should stick out to you. If you don't know him, I encourage you to explore his works. The second name is Hall Johnson. I know many of us know some of his more well-known spirituals. He is out of Athens. He was out of Athens, Georgia. He studied at many different schools. Self-taught violinist. He was an instrumentalist first, and then became a composer of choral works. That little note is for all of the Westminster people who are on the call. I know there are several of us. Hall Johnson was a colleague and a friend of John Finley Williamson, while Dr. Williamson and the Westminster Choir were first here in New Jersey. And Hall Johnson was a vocal coach to Marian Anderson, Robert McFerrin, Bobby McFerrin's father, Shirley Verrett, and a slew of other notable artists. Hall Johnson comes to prominence during the advent of media and television. And Hall Johnson created a choir called the Hall Johnson Negro Choir, which was pretty much a symphonic chorus of about 500 or 600 voices that would offer themselves for Broadway productions on the East Coast and for films. Most notably in film, Green Pastures, which is a film that depicts Bible stories through the lens of African Americans. And the choir, they're literally the biblical characters. And in theater, Run Little Children. A protege of Hall Johnson was Jester Hairston. And Jester Hairston, what Hall Johnson did on the East Coast in New York and in Broadway, Jester Hairston did out in Hollywood on the West Coast. Again, I'm sure these are names all of us have heard of from time to time. Helen is correct in that Robert McFerrin, Bobby McFerrin's father, was the first Black opera singer to be heard and to perform at the Metropolitan Opera. That history is very closely connected to the composers of this time. William Dawson, out of Alabama, ran away at the age of 14 to study at the Tuskegee Institute, where Booker T. Washington was the president at that time. He then went on to several institutions. His folk symphony was premiered by the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he is one of the first African-American composers of the early 20th century to have their piece performed by a major orchestra. Those of you who are members of Phi Mu Alpha Sinfonia, as I am, would be glad to know that he also was a Sinfonian, a true musician at heart. Among William Dawson's most notable spiritual arrangements is Ezekiel Saw the Wheel, which was written for John Finley Williamson and the Westminster Choir. And then some other notable pioneering composers, again, not exhaustive, but just a list to get you started. Nathaniel Dett, who I spoke about a little earlier, born in Canada, came to New York and integrated the music school at, I believe, Eastman. Ava Jesse, first prominent African-American woman choral conductor. She was the chorus master for the premiere performances of Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, and her choir, the Ava Jesse choir, served as the chorus. Lena McLin is still living out, I think, in Chicago. She's taught many, a notable singer. She's also a pastor. Florence Price, a name you should know. Florence Price actually has been coming up in national conversation as of late. Her symphonic works have kind of received a breath of fresh air. Florence Price had to write to orchestras for 10 years before they would even look at her music. And then after someone finally looked at her music, it took years from that last note before her pieces were performed by the Cleveland Orchestra. Julia Perry, born in Kentucky, but has roots in New Jersey, in that she earned undergraduate degrees from Westminster Choir College. George Walker, who is celebrating a centennial, he died just a few years ago, born in Washington, D.C., but actually lived in his later years for many years and died in Montclair, right here in New Jersey. As is the case with Ulysses Kay, born in Arizona, but also died in New Jersey. So Jersey clearly is a great place. That's the lesson in the slide here. So we talk about, the classical music and the forms in which we see it. And we know the different genres and styles of music we're used to seeing when we think about classical music. I would submit to you and share to you that the forms that we think about sometimes in our mainstream, I'm going to call it, for lack of a better term, classical choral music, also apply to this music. Oh, I'm also going to add Margaret Bonds and Undine Smith Moore to that list of pioneering composers. Thank you for the private message. So these are genres and styles of music that we think about at the same time with our other classical music that we should apply to African-American choral music. Elizabeth, the answer is yes, and he actually comes up a little later in the presentation. But Samuel Coleridge Taylor did compose a great deal of choral music. When I was an undergrad, and throughout my own kind of educational journey, I could list art songs, choral art songs, oratorio, hymns, cantatas, anthems, motets, and masses of the canon. And I'm sure you're brain is reciting them as we speak. It took me a while to discover that Black classical choral music also shares this kind of format in many ways. So that's how I'm going to break down some of the literature and the repertoire that we're going to explore and discuss today. The first is choral art songs. Most things fall under choral art songs in many ways. We think of its makeup as being makeup of chorus and piano, secular in nature. Rollo Dilworth really kind of brought the term choral art song to life, but he got it from his teacher, Dr. Robert Harris at Northwestern University, where he served for many, many years. Rollo Dilworth, I'm sure as many of us know, is the vice dean of the music school at Temple University. So here are just 3 examples of choral art songs. I'm going to share a little bit of a recording of Mark Miller's I Believe. Unfortunately, the videos are small because I had to fit them on the slide, which is why I did not really share videos that had humans in it. But I encourage you, in addition to this recording, I encourage you to find the beautiful recording done by Harmonium and Matlack of this piece. I know that they've collaborated a great deal with Mark Miller, who is a New Jersey composer. So here's a little bit of I Believe. Beautiful piece. I encourage you to listen to the rest of the piece. It's published through Choristers Guild. Persephone Powell's To Sit and Dream is a piece that uses text by Langston Hughes, the notable Harlem Renaissance poet. Dr. Persephone Powell is the most published Black woman composer, period. And did some study at Westminster Choir College. She and her husband both earned their graduate degrees from Westminster and spent some time in New Jersey. And William Dawson, one of the pioneering composers I shared with you earlier, composed some beautiful choral art songs. Oratorio, something that we're a little bit more familiar with, I'm certain. Chorus and piano and or additional instruments, mostly sacred in nature, multi-movement, larger scaled works. The 2 oratorios that I've listed here are significant in that they share the story of men through the compositional pen of women. Margaret Bond's oratorio, The Ballad of the Brown King, talks about the wise men, its nativity oratorio. I'm going to play a little bit of a recording of the Dessorf choirs and Dr. Malcolm Merriweather, which is a name that I will mention later in the presentation, but that's just a name you should know, as his scholarship has really brought the music of Margaret Bonds to life. So here's a little bit of the Ballad of the Brown King.
Mary had a little baby, Jesus, that was his name. All the world became was brighter when little Jesus, the Christ child, came. That was in a lowly manger, outside the night was cold. But in that holy manger, behold, the one is born, is
Really beautiful work. Definitely accessible for community ensembles. The work really is great for the holidays. Laquita Mitchell is the soprano on the recording. Ashley Jackson is a New Jersey born and bred harpist who has done incredible work on the repertoire of Margaret Bonds. And Laquita is a graduate of Westminster Choir College in Princeton, New Jersey. So Jersey connections abound. Let me go on to cantatas. Cantatas are like oratorio, except they often can have a secular makeup. Cantatas oftentimes are smaller scaled than oratorio, but has some of the same qualities in terms of instrumentation and the multi-movement nature. William Grant Stills and They Lynched Him on a Tree. William Grant Still, I would place in one of those pioneering composer seats. William Grant Still wrote And They Lynched Him on a Tree in response to Abel Maripole's song Strange Fruit, which was made famous by Billie Holiday. This particular cantata is written for double chorus, a chorus, according to the score, of Black singers and a chorus of white singers. The white singers depict the mob, and the Black singers depict the victim of the lynching and the family and friends of the victim. There are provisions for ensembles that want to do it that don't have that kind of makeup. It's a very unique kind of makeup, which has truthfully not led to much performance of the piece, but it is a moving 16-minute work for narration, double choir, and contralto soloist. The Jubilee Singers at Westminster gave one of really the last true public performances of this piece about 15 years ago. It has had, again, some performance since then, but really modest performance due to its nature. Personally and academically, it was a great teaching piece for my college choirs as we dealt with ways to respond to race relations, particularly in the last 2 years. So here's a little bit of And They Lynched Him on a Tree. So that's a little bit of And They Lynched Him on a Tree. Persephone Powell's The Cry of Jeremiah was actually commissioned by the American Organists Guild for their convention, I think back in 2013. Four movement work with narration. It has three movements that are in ABA form. The final movement is a praise and worship gospel style. The first three movements are very classically created and crafted. Anthems. Sally, to answer your question, I do not know if the piece had been performed at the Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, but it would be a good thing to find out. So I will put that down. Again, colleagues, please don't hesitate to ask questions. I will answer them as I see them. Anthems. Most of us are church musicians or have been in church and know what an anthem is. And we also know what a motet is. Really, the difference between an anthem and a motet is that an anthem is homophonic in nature as compared to the motet, which is more polyphonic and the lines are more independent. I wanted to share a motet of R. Nathaniel Dett's with you. R. Nathaniel Dett is a pioneering composer who really takes the folk tune, but puts it through a classical lens. And he did that because of the time in which he was in, being a generation removed from slavery and having to deal with the stigma in the Black community about slavery and wanting to disassociate themselves with everything related to it. R. Nathaniel Dett made it his charge to create classical pieces and genres that were accepted, for lack of a better term, by the white community using the folk tunes of the slave songs. So R. Nathaniel Dett's Deep River uses the Deep River melody that we all know, but he writes it in a motet style and he lists it as a motet. Likewise, the Listen to the Lambs spiritual theme is written in R. Nathaniel Dett's anthem, Listen to the Lambs. The average person would think of it as a spiritual. He designates his music, however, appropriate to the genre of music. So it'll say, for example, an anthem in the style of, or using the folk tune. This Deep River is a motet that uses the spiritual theme, Deep River. So here's a little bit of R. Nathaniel Dett's Deep River. Again, the tune that we know and that we are familiar with, however, lines very independent, as in the style of the motet. All right, just two more kind of styles and then some composers, and I'm getting out of your way so we can talk. The next style of music, the mass. We all know what a mass is. Chorus, piano, multi-movement, large scale. Or not. George Walker's Mass is large scale. We spoke about George Walker, a New Jersey based composer. Adolphus Hailstork is living and just celebrated his 80th birthday. He has a Missa Brevis for treble ensemble, which was first written for tenor bass ensemble. Florence Price, who I shared with you, her symphonic works have become a part of the national dialogue as of late. She also does have choral works, and she has a communion service in F. George Walker's Mass came out, I want to say, a few years after the Leonard Bernstein Mass. And if you know the Leonard Bernstein Mass, then this credo of George Walker's will sound a little familiar to you. So I'll play just a little bit of the George Walker Mass. George Walker's centennial is this year, and I encourage as many of our New Jersey ensembles as possible to pay homage to this New Jersey composer. The Mass is a little bit of an extensive stretch work if your ensembles are ambitious and ready to do it. But if not, there are psalm settings. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning composer and has settings for all types of ensembles. So here's a little bit of the George Walker credo. So Bernstein lovers, there you have it. And then finally, part songs. Unaccompanied, most times secular. Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who was asked about before, has several beautiful part song arrangements. And here's a little bit of Summer is Gone. Samuel Coleridge Taylor also has larger choral works, Hiawatha's Wedding Feast being one of them. If you're looking for something large scale from Samuel Coleridge Taylor. Contemporary composers, fret not. I neglected to do so before the presentation, but there will be a handout that accompanies this with these names listed. So if you fail to get all of these names, please do not fret. But I wanted to share with you some of the names of the men and women who are contributing to the canon today in real time. All of these composers living, people you can find on Facebook and on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and people that you can reach out to and say, hey, what was the intent of this particular passage? Or what did you really mean here? Or why is something this way? This list, again, is not exhaustive. This is just a list to get you started. I want to bring your attention to Dr. Malcolm Merriweather, who himself is not much of a composer, but has taken a lot of scores from the 20th century and has reworked them, reorchestrated them, or provided orchestration. And I encourage you to look out. He has an edition of Margaret Bond's The Ballad of the Brown King. He also has, he will be coming out with an edition of the Margaret Bond's Credo, which uses Black empowerment text by W.E. Du Bois. So I encourage you to look for the catalog and the output of these incredible composers. And I encourage you to look at some of these resources. Dr. Marcus L.A. Garrett has an online database as part of his website called The Non-Idiomatic Music of Black Composers. Non-idiomatic music is music that is not derived from the folk music of a particular culture. American folk music, American idiomatic music would be the spiritual and gospel. Therefore, non-idiomatic music is everything that's not that. His catalog has everything by voicing, by instrumentation, and you can go in and say, hey, I need an SATB with orchestra, and those pieces will come up, or whatever your makeup is. I encourage you to also visit the online database for the Institute for Composer Diversity. They have composers of all different genres, but as it pertains to us, their choral database. Blake Morgan, who's a member of Which is 8, has created a list of 31 Black choral composers and some of their works, free and accessible online. I encourage you to also visit the African American Church Music Series by GIA. And Marina shared a little bit about the National Association of Negro Musicians before, but the National Association of Negro Musicians is the country's oldest organization dedicated to the performance and study of music performed by and music written and composed by African Americans. It presents scholarships annually and has done so for over a decade. Its first scholarship recipient was Marian Anderson in 1919. I have the pleasure of serving as the Eastern Region Director. The Eastern Region is the largest region of the association. There are 13 branches, and you do not need to be African American to be a member of this organization. Those who wish to learn about the music and be connected to those who are creating and performing the music are welcome to join. Also, Early Music America, who would have ever thought? But Early Music America is a wonderful resource for classical composers of color, native-born South American composers from Brazil, Peru, Cuba, Mexico, Guatemala, Bolivia, from 1600 to about 1800. There are resources so easily accessible, sometimes we just fail to know that they exist because we don't say them out loud. So these are resources that I think would be of great use to those of you who desire to perform and to learn more about this music. And when we perform this music, let's be intentional about it. Let's challenge ourselves to think outside of the idiomatic form of just spirituals and gospel, which has a place, but let's challenge ourselves to look into those art songs, to look into those masses, to look into those forms of idiomatic and non-idiomatic music, because it really impacts our organizations for the better when we give them music of a shared American experience. And then as you program this repertoire, do your research, find culture bearers or people that are acquainted with this repertoire. You know someone in me, you know Helen, we now know Matt, we know Ryan. We all have resources that we can pull from. Don't ever be afraid to reach out for resources and help. things that we don't always consider when it comes to this repertoire, really, though, is the placement of this music in our programs. There's nothing wrong with putting idiomatic music, i.e. spirituals and gospel, at the ends of your programs, but do it with intent, or put them in the beginning of your program with intent, or make it make sense thematically. There are songs for most of the themes we all can think of. And then in the larger context, as artistic directors, as leaders, as conductors, it is our job to do the work and to come to our ensembles having done the work, and then allowing them to be part of the journey to creating something really beautiful. I mean, that's our reasonable service as artistic leaders. And it's not always easy, but it's certainly worth the conversation and worth the dialogue. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You're going to stop looking at a PowerPoint. You're going to look at my face, which is not that pleasing, but it's what we have for now. And I'm also going to share this time and this space with our panelists. And the question that we want to talk about really is, how to create space for this repertoire in our programs, as well as all of us would like to take any questions or comments or feedback that you have based on the presentation. I know we did a whole bunch of stuff in about 30 minutes. And if you're like me, I'll fall asleep and the question will come to me at 2:00 in the morning. But if you have your question now, we would love to hear it and to engage in conversation with you. And I guess first I'll open it up to Ryan, Matt, and Helen for any kind of opening responses or remarks that might spark our conversation.
That would be great. And first of all, Vinroy, thank you for a really very, very interesting but really just chock full of really great information, this presentation. I think there are names in there that some of us have heard, but others that we might not have. And certainly there's repertory in there that I never heard of before. And so that was extremely intriguing, to say the least. I very much would like to hear from our panelists about their experiences with this repertory. What brought you to that repertory? How did your chorus react to this repertory also? What did you do to make their understanding of it and their realization of it successful? So if our panelists would chime in, we'd be delighted.
Thank you. I want to, if it's okay, if I want to kind of bounce off of something that Vinroy said. And I think that last slide where he mentioned, doing research, and the research and the time that you would put in to a Bach piece that you're presenting, you want to make sure that you're putting that same work and that same integrity into the pieces of the Black composers that you are programming. And I think oftentimes there's a few things, right? We don't know where to look. We don't know what to program. And that's all about access, right? You go on J.W. Pepper and you see the people that they want you to see, the people that are their artists in residence, the people that are their salaried people. So thank you, Vinroy, for that, that list of resources of where to look. I think that's so important. I think another thing that's incredibly important is not getting into the habit of only programming Black music for a themed Black History Month concert, or only programming women composers, whether they are, regardless of their race, only on a woman composer concert. We want to make sure that we are incorporating and integrating this rep and this literature into every concert, right? If you're going to do a mass, why not choose a mass by a Black composer? It's not that they didn't write them. They're out there. They exist. We know. And Vinroy gave us just a taste, right, of what's available. So I think that's the biggest thing. And also, like Vinroy said, don't be afraid to program the rep. And I think if you go in timid as the artistic director or as the conductor, your choir is going to receive that vibe and respond timidly as well. But if you go in and approach that piece with just as much integrity as you would approach any piece, then the response will be wonderful.
And if I could chime in just really quickly to piggyback off of that, I said this was safe space, so I'm just going to put it out there. I understand sometimes the discomfort some of our white colleagues have performing music that is not necessarily of their tradition and of their background. And the reason I advocate for everyone performing this music is because above this being Black music, this is American music. And all of us regularly perform music from cultures that we don't always identify with. And we don't think of it as an issue. And somehow the social construct of the country, much greater than you and I could possibly ever handle, has allowed us to believe that somehow we have to be of a certain hue to perform this music. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. I've also found that ensembles are afraid to do it because they feel as if their ensembles don't represent that population and they don't wish to offend. And I would submit that the ensembles will continue to look homogenous until we make a decision, a conscious decision, to program diverse composers and diverse music. Personally, and then I'll stop talking off my soapbox, and I always share this story. When I was at Westminster for my senior recital, I performed a Handel bass cantata, I performed a German lied, I performed chanson, I performed English art song, before I even touched a spiritual. And, you know, I studied German for 15 years, but I'm not German. Italian was great. I'm not Italian. I'm scared of French. And I did it anyway. And I didn't think about it, you know, and we do it all the time. And I think it's important for us to affirm each other in the spaces that we are in. We're not always going to see the diversity we wish to see in our ensembles or the diversity that we wish to see in our audiences. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't perform the diverse music that really tugs at our hearts and really is music that is worth sharing with the community. So I'm just backing up what Helen said, and I'm gonna Matt, Ryan, please feel free to respond or to chime in. And I have to apologize to Ryan because I know he's heard this lecture already, but there you have it.
Well, it's it takes on a different complexion every time, Vinroy, and it's exciting that since we last heard you talk about this, the singers of Princeton for Musica and Mama Civic Chorus and my chorus in New York, Amor Artis, met as we all did in various ways during the pandemic over Zoom to try to have some enrichment and connections to our choral art, even when we couldn't be in the same room together singing. And one of the things we did is we twice had Vinroy come and chat with us, both about repertoire in the way that he did today, and also just more generally about issues on racial justice and music. As for me, this has been, I think, the most exciting time with respect to programming in my career thus far. There's something happening. There's something happening in the world. Something has changed in the last 2 years. And then in our choral world, I also think we have crossed some kind of Rubicon. And it's really thrilling. I always find programming to be equal parts very, very challenging and very, very exciting. And I love puzzles, and it always feels to me like a puzzle. And so my approach has been essentially, how do I put this? On the one hand, I have just determined that I am going to program the music of women composers and Black composers just in all programs. It doesn't matter what the theme might be, whether it's a holiday program or, I'm working on a program right now that's featuring the works of Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, and contemporary composers' responses to them. My favorite piece on the program is by a Black composer named Ken Burton. The pieces are out there, and it's been so with that in place, and that's and Vinroy, thank you for making this safe space for us. It's important for me to always remember that no one piece that I can program is going to do anything more than barely move the needle, which is why I've tried to make a more holistic commitment. It's not enough just to do a piece here or a piece there, but to say this is our programming philosophy going forward. But at the same time, I've tried to have the same programming approach to that puzzle, right? Which isn't to say, oh, well, I have to have a piece by a Black composer, so I'm just going to pick one off the shelf, right? But it is what is the flow of this program, right? Or sometimes it's very practical. What instruments are going to be in the hall? And so what pieces use those instruments? So in May, Princeton Pro Musica is going to do Hailstork's Shout for Joy, because the instrumentation is the same instrumentation as other works that we're doing on the program, right? And so I will have those brass players and those percussionists on hand, and we'll be able to do it. So that's one way in for me, right? Is to figure out what a program needs in a particular moment. And I really am grateful for the work that has already been done. Things like Beyond Elijah Rock, Marquez Garrett's wonderful database, the video that I shared from Early Music America, and so many other great resources. But that's really just the beginning of the work, right? So for me, this feels like this programming that I've always done and that wonderful exploration, but now there are just more things to choose from. And that's been thrilling to learn some new voices. The other thing that I'm thinking about is this issue of familiarity. And there was a blog or like a listicle that went around by Allegra Martin recently in the last week or so. And she really zeroed in on something that resonated with me. And that is, people don't necessarily love Beethoven 9 because it's any better than anything else. They love it because they are familiar with it, right? They know it. And so part of what I'm hoping to do for the rest of my career in programming is figure out which pieces resonate with people and do them again, right? Do them a second time, a third time, a fourth time, so that our audiences and our singers can get to know them. And so one of the, when Princeton Pro Musica returned to live performance, sort of the first thing I put down on the list to do that was Brahms' Wie Lieblich, because that's a piece that ensemble knows really well and that its patrons really love. And the second piece was Lift Every Voice and Sing, because to me it felt critical and important that a piece that is so well known by so many, right, needs to be a part of our repertoire and a part of our experience, and just sort of connecting, as you were saying, Vinroy, to that broader American experience and a broader American choral experience. So this is a really exciting time. And I also hope in the near future to find the resources to commission. We've been sort of working backwards about what has been written up to date. And I hope to be able to do some stuff going forward. I also hope to do a couple of things in the same vein that Malcolm Merriweather has been doing. So for instance, this last year in the fall, I was commissioned by the Lexington Philharmonic in Kentucky to make an orchestral version of Margaret Bond's piano voice version of Go Tell It on the Mountain. It's a beautiful piano part. And a conductor said, can you make this an orchestra part, right, for a baritone named Reginald Smith? And I said, certainly. And it translated really beautifully to orchestra. And I think that may be another way for ensembles like Princeton Per Musica and Mama Civic Chorus to typically perform with an orchestra to access even more repertoire, because both Florence Price and Bonds and so many of the composers that you mentioned, they have really magnificent solo vocal art songs that I think could become choral art songs or choral or orchestral songs.
Thank you for that, Ryan. Matt, do you mind, while you also share some responses,
Sure.
tapping into Audrey's question a little bit?
Sure. It's interesting. Vinroy, I really feel quite affirmed in your presentation. Also, just because of the way that I think choral music needs to function. And as Ryan mentioned, it needs to move forward integrated into performances. Not just this is going to be our spiritual at the end of the concert, but this is going to be integrated into the whole theme. And if you're like me, I really like to program in a very thematic way. So the whole concert experience tells a story, or shares a message. And to do that, it truly needs to be integrated based on style, on text, and all that, and not just by the hue of the composer's skin. I will tell you, and I'm glad that you mentioned this was a really safe space, because coming from growing up in the Midwest Ohio, we weren't exposed to non-idiomatic Black music. We just it wasn't part of what we did in that corner of small corner of the United States. And so when I went to college and I came over here to New Jersey and went to Rutgers, and this whole realm opened up to me. And now certainly, as Ryan mentioned, this sort of transition has happened, or this sort of wonderful burst of repertoire has kind of popped back onto the scene. And I, like you, Ryan, I take programming very, very seriously and intentionally picking pieces to be integrated, not just as a feature or as this, but integrated into the whole thing. So, for example, the New Jersey Chamber Singers, the group that I conduct, we're going to be doing a concert with William Grant Still's Plain Chant for America, which is just a gorgeous work that I fell in love with, along with John Crigliano's Fern Hill and Jake Runestad's little-known The Secret of the Sea, simply because they share instrumentation. That was the sort of bottom line. And I thought, okay, I already had Plain Chant for America in my scope, and this is where I wanted to build off of it. So it'll be this sort of thematic journey throughout all of that. And another point to bring up, and I know this has been mentioned several times previous, and I'll share all the resources I have. I have too. Graphite Publishing is a great publishing website that really amplifies underrepresented composers or budding composers, or folks who just want to get their music out there. And it's a great resource. Brittany Boykin's part of that group. Reginald Wright is also another composer or arranger. Christopher Harris, just fabulous. So to find repertoire, I think that's the hardest part. And Vinroy, just to affirm what you've been saying, and Helen said the same thing too. Find those pieces. Make the effort to find those pieces. And they could even start. I've started with William Grant Still's vocal books, and there's some sacred things in there. I remember singing those in college, and I've used those as offertories at church. I've used those as anthems. I've used the spirituals of Harry Burley. I don't know if y'all have that yellow book. I love that book. It's just gorgeous. But there's so much more if you dig deeper. There's so much more. So thanks for the opportunity to really amplify all of this and to affirm those really intentional programmatic choices.
I'd love to invite Anne Matlack to chime in here because she's a real programming whiz and has done a lot of great work programming the music of Black composers.
Ryan, that's really nice of you. I totally agree with you about there's like something new in the air for the last 2 years, and I know that myself, during the pandemic and during Black Lives Matter movements, I was like, well, what can I do? Well, in my small little world, I can do this. I can learn more. I can learn more composers. I'd already given myself a challenge to try to bring equity to my programming of women composers, and by which I don't mean there's a woman composer on your program. It means that half of your program is women. So I've really been striving to do that, and it's been a fun thing to research. And just like someone was just saying, like, a couple of you were saying about publishers, if you go to J.W. Pepper, no, but a lot of these composers that have been mentioned today have their own websites, right? And or a cooler publisher like Graphite. And a lot of those websites you can even search by theme. So if you're planning a theme, you can go and look. Okay, what's a Christmas piece? What's a piece about peace? What's a piece about brotherhood? Whatever. It's very very user friendly to be on the internet these days and to be doing this fun research. And two other things I wanted to remind people. Representation also happens in terms of the texts that you're using. So, for example, right now we're doing a concert, Resilience, and I'm doing a piece by Carol, I think it's Carol Barnett, but it was a white woman, but the text is W.E.B. Du Bois, so it's God bless the young folk. A lot of times you'll have good public domain poetry that you're doing. People love to set Sarah Teasdale because they're beautiful short poems. So in terms of women and composers of color, and also don't forget there are a lot of trans composers, non-binary composers. There's a lot of stuff that you can do to just sort of show the diversity of our world, of our choral world. And finally, I wanted to give a shout out to Deborah Simkin King, that some of you know, and her project Encore, because that's a website where you can go and find a lot of composers and a lot of pieces that have been performed, say, once, but have not had a second or third performance. And it's got resources where you can hear the piece, where you can see the piece, where you can find the publisher, where you can contact the composer. So Project Encore is a good place to go. And I'm so happy that people are looking to diversify their whole sort of outlook on repertoire. And my final thing is I was saying, don't throw out the entire choral canon, though. That's the nice thing about having a theme. I like to still program a piece by Holst or something, maybe an obscure piece that goes with then, like you were saying, you're doing Tallis and then a partner piece by a 20th century, 21st century composer. It's a great way to sort of bring people in.
And I think to Anne's point, this is in no way, shape, or form to replace.
Right.
I think it is more to revive and to replenish than it is to replace the canon. We all have our choral upbringing on the canon, and there's nothing wrong with the canon. I'm just here to tell you that there's more that we can tap into. Helen, can you talk a little bit about my good friend Marjorie Klein is on. She's always on. And
I actually wanted to, yeah.
All right, and Marjorie talked about, the fear of cultural appropriation. Do you mind just chiming in on that?
Sure. So I think that's a great question, and that's a great fear, Marjorie, that a lot of choral singers and conductors have, and someone, I don't know if it was in direct response to Marjorie or if it was just a response, but someone said, Anthony said it, programming these works more regularly will take away that fear. But in the meantime, before we get there, right, what do? I think the first most important thing, and yell at me if you want, is do not program, and this is a passion of mine, do not program spirituals by white men. If you're going to program a Negro spiritual, make sure the composer is a Black composer. I'm very passionate about that. There are all of these phenomenal composers that are out there. And that goes for like a lot of things, right? Like there are some great, like beautiful Korean folk songs that have been set by white composers. And then that's where I think the fear comes in. And I'm not saying that you can't do that, right? Because we know that Zoltan Kodály, like and Dvorak, like their biggest passion was taking folk music and bringing it to light, taking it from other cultures and showing and showcasing it, right? So there is a way to do it. And Vinroy mentioned this: research, 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 research. Call a friend, call a resource that you know. Don't change text. If it's written in a dialect, use the dialect. Don't add in dialect if there is no dialect, right? So what I mean by that is if, right, like Jester Harrison, he doesn't always use dialect, but he uses it often. So if he's using ain't a dat good news, then that's what your choir says, ain't a dat good news. And you talk about the importance of that. And you talk about the history of the spiritual and how the spiritual, and Vinroy touched on this, the spiritual was set in a classical Western style so that it could please white audiences. Some of the first HBCUs were funded, I'm just thinking of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, right? Fisk University, the building was literally funded by the Fisk Jubilee Singers going around putting on concerts at white churches to raise money to build their historically Black college, right? To literally build the building, and so talking about that and knowing about that, that's incredibly important. A lot of these Negro spirituals were set in a Western style, like Jester Harrison, Nathaniel Dett, even, Roland Carter, and all of these composers, they're set in a Western style to appease the Western audience and to make them comfortable. So it's classical music. We know classical music. It's what we were raised and brought up on. And I had a conversation with a friend about this, Wayne Mallette, who is in music education and a choral director. And he's Black, and he talked about how he had to learn German lieder, and he had to learn, the chanson, the French folk song. He's not German nor French. He's American, and he was never taught a spiritual. His teacher was never like, hey, so-and-so, you're not Black. Let me teach you this spiritual. This is a part of our culture as Americans. And someone said this the other day, not the other day, I saw the video the other day, Esperanza Spalding, a beautiful jazz bassist, she said, and when she said this, I started shouting. I was like, she's so right. Jazz music is American classical music. Mm-hmm. And that hit me. I was like, oh my God, because I love jazz. And it is. And so if this is American music and we are American, we cannot appropriate this culture if we are treating the music with respect. That's the biggest thing. If we are treating this music with respect and we are doing our due diligence to research this music and treating it with as much integrity as we would treat a Brahms, motet. So that's my little spiel.
And two things in response to that. One, the reality is you're never going to please everyone. So if you're out here to please people, you should stop now. There are going to be some people who are just going to always be annoyed that this choir of predominantly non-African American singers is singing a Moses Hogan spiritual. So what? I've had people come to me and tell me I shouldn't do Brahms. I just conducted my first Ein Deutsches Requiem. Gladly. Do it anyway. So that's number one. Number two, Ryan is an incredible human being for many, many reasons. But he's incredible because he reads minds, and he put the two books I was going to put in the chat. And I encourage you, Dr. Felissa Barber is at Westfield State University. She is the only African-American woman to be the director of choral activities at a predominantly white institution in the country. She's also the president of Massachusetts ACDA. Part of her doctoral research, she studied with Andre Thomas, a name I know we all know, at Florida State University, was putting dialect in IPA. I mean, if we can't get any more much accessible than this, this book walks through the linguistics, the history, and kind of gives a framework for dialects, the dialects that we see in most of the spirituals that we would perform in our own canon. And she literally provides IPA for the dialect. So there's no question about how we should recite our dialect. And I know dialect can sometimes be scary for some of our ensembles to take on. So please check out her book. Eileen Gunther is a beautiful, beautiful soul. In their own words, The Slave Life and Power of the Spirituals is a book that I recommend everyone read. She's a white woman. That book changes lives. I encourage each of you to check out those two resources as you kind of explore this. I'm trying to think of what else I have over here, but nothing else comes to me right now. Oh, From Spirituals to Symphonies is an anthology of, well, not really an anthology, it's kind of a book that dives into 9 Black women composers, their biographies and their discography. Some of the women I mentioned here, as well as others. Again, there are resources out there. You just got to try to find them. And a lot of them are very, Ryan's the best. They're all out there. So what else is on my bookshelf? I have, in their own words, I have From Spirituals to Symphonies. I would encourage each of you to check out Andre Thomas's Way Over in Beulah Land. It's a kind of compilation of the stories and works of pioneering composers as well as living composers. I think it's important to give space and platform to composers that are living because we need this art form to continue. And the way that it's going to continue is if we empower the next generation of composers and artists and give them the platform that they so rightly deserve.
I just want to jump back to something that shouldn't be surprising, but I do think bears repeating, and that is to say, when you were saying you're not going to please everyone, right? That part of my programming philosophy, going forward, which I've done a lot of thinking about and revised quite a bit over the last couple of years, is also you don't have to like every piece by a Black composer. I don't like every piece by 19th century European composers, and you always want to research them and present them, as Helen was saying, with dedication and intent. But not every piece resonates with you as an artist, or even with your chorus. And so there will be pieces that I will do that maybe I won't do again, that I won't come back to, right? And that's okay. There are certain works by Mozart even that I think are kind of a snooze, and I'll never program them. And then there are other works by Mozart that I love that I'll do over and over again. And I hope that our fear about doing the wrong thing or appropriation and just the general sort of charged nature of this conversation. I mean, Vinroy has done such a beautiful job of opening this conversation, but I hope that we don't squeeze out the space for us to be artists with an individual point of view, who like a certain kind of thing and or are drawn to certain kinds of pieces. That we don't lose sight of that in this bigger conversation.
I want to say one more thing about appropriation. I think that, and Ryan just said something that sparked something in me. Like, we don't all also have to be so locked down and only doing music that's on a score, right? Like, I'm thinking of like beautiful, beautiful pieces from South Africa that are all taught orally, you know. And if you like learn a piece at a workshop, like you go to ACDA or you go to NJMEA and you hear this like awesome piece and it's taught by rote, don't be afraid to teach those pieces by rote through the oral tradition and talk about how important the oral tradition is, not only in African music, but in all music, right? Before there was the notation, we all, just like we tell fairy tales, right? That's why we have so many versions of fairy tales. That's why I have so many versions of folk songs, right? Don't be afraid. Don't feel like, okay, well, I'm a classically trained composer, I must teach reading. And yes, you have to. But teaching a piece by rote, it will open up your singer's ears in a way, and their memory in a way that they would never have experienced before. You know, like going from the word and the score and then moving to an oral taught piece, that's an incredible experience as well. So I just wanted to, don't be afraid to do things that you think you have to do because you're a classically trained conductor. You know, there's, and Ryan said something that kind of made me think about that. So
I think everyone except for me has done it so far. I'm going to put my own contact information in the chat. I know Ryan, Matt, Helen, and I are happy to continue the conversation. Ryan, Matt, and Helen are doing the work. Helen, just by virtue of our own upbringing at Westminster, have been in conversation for quite some time. Ryan and I have had so many meaningful conversations. And I think sometimes he thinks that he's the one learning, but I learn from him as much as he learns from me, I hope. And Matt, like, these are people who are doing the work. And I know that there are more than 4 of us on this call doing the work. I know Marina's doing the work and has been doing the work. She conducts a third of New Jersey's choirs. But you know, there are so many people on this call who are doing beautiful things. And these platforms are great opportunities for us to share what we all are doing. And I know I would love to hear from each of you about what you all are doing. So please do not hesitate to reach out with questions, with concerns, or just with the desire to continue the conversation. The only way we're going to change the things we don't always like about our profession is if we get them head on and we deal with them head on. And New Jersey is quite equipped to do that with the caliber of musicians who lead our ensembles. And I'm thankful always for the platform. I'm grateful to my colleagues who have served as panelists, to the consortium. I mean, this has been a great conversation that I hope each of you have found fruitful. And with that, on behalf of Helen, Matt, Ryan, and I, just thank you. And
Vinroy, we need to thank you all. You have opened up our eyes, our ears, our intellect, and hopefully the beginning of touching our hearts with this, the possibility that this music presents. The passion that all of you have exhibited for this repertory today is tremendously emblematic of what we might all experience if we were indeed to venture forward and start to explore it more. And so I think what we've just done today is opened up a very wonderful door. That we've been able to have the benefit of your scholarship and all of your experiences so that we can indeed start to think differently about this repertory. Right now I'm doing a program all of international choral music, and I had to be brave to program things from Russia and China and whatever. I don't speak those languages. That hasn't stopped me. I'm doing them. And I think that's the case with the repertory we discussed today. With good research, with good preparation, with commitment to the music, once you find something that speaks to you, you can sell that to your ensemble, you can sell that to your audience in a way that will connect and that will give them a qualitative experience. And so very, very, very much, I more than endorse the approaches that you have all taken, and you serve as wonderful, wonderful examples for all of us. Thank you for making yourselves available for further contact. Thank you for making this day a tremendously productive one and informative one for all of us, and huge thanks from the consortium itself. Can we all give a virtual round of applause to our presenters and our panel? Indeed. A great job done by one and all. And let's get busy and do some research and start programming. Okay, so please stay tuned for future events of the consortium. We're going to be coming up with a bunch of stuff soon. And the more that we can connect with each other, the better off we are as a choral community, the better off we all are within our own organizations and our own practices. So indeed, let us continue
Marina,